Hey there, Hunters, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Today I want to continue on my semi-ranting about Sunbreak and just kind of discuss why I haven't been super excited for Sunbreak and why it's not really holding my attention, nor will it keep my attention regardless of title updates. This is going to be a continuation of the previous video I did, so there might be some overlap in topics, but I just want to talk about more as Sunbreak as a whole rather than just me and speedrunning. So let's just dive into this. First, I do want to point out that Sunbreak was definitely a huge step forward over the base game of Rise. The expanded silk binds, the switch skills, the new options and features, and all that stuff, even the fights themselves with the monsters are all much better than base Rise. And the game is quite good for a playthrough. You can easily dump a few hundred hours into Sunbreak without hitting any sort of wall, which is pretty amazing for what you're paying for. Most games don't have that kind of retention. However, unlike other Monster Hunter titles, Sunbreak definitely isn't holding on to player retention very well, definitely not as well as Monster Hunter World had, and I don't think any title updates are going to be saving it. One of the main problems I have personally with Rise is that the endgame grind systems are basically just traps. For anyone who's looked at the odds and what you can obtain through the charms and armor augment systems, you know that you're never going to get anything that will be considered good enough to finish a build. You'll never get a god tier charms, you'll never get perfect armor augments, which I totally understand shouldn't be a goal in the first place, it's not realistic, but that's quite literally the only thing to chase in the game. It only takes a couple kills to make all the monster armors and weapons. Every quest and item drop is revolving around this whole melding system and fishing for these, and when you know it's gonna be at best adequate, it kind of bums me out. So fishing for charms and augments is kind of lame. World did have similar systems, but the amount of event quests for decoration farming and the RNG with Siphoning Cold not being that bad meant that you could actually finish builds, get best builds on paper done. In Rise, that's not happening, ever. So regardless of what they add in the future, those underlying RNG systems will stay in place and will always be there hindering any fun, because I know there's no point in grinding, as the grinding rewards are just basically a mirage. I'm sure they will expand on the weapons and armor augments like they did with Iceborne, but unless they totally overhaul how the system rolls skills, it's never gonna feel good. Also, why do gun augments only get attack and affinity? Bows get element, melee gets sharpness, guns get shafted. Gunner complaints, I know nobody cares, but yeah. The other problem I have is definitely a minority complaint for sure, but that's just with gunning in general. I'm a gunner, it's what I do, and I love gunning, I just don't like it in 5th gen. So, how can I keep playing when I'm just not enjoying it? I can go on forever about all the fundamental wrongdoings with the bowguns, but I'll just cover a few broad topics here so I don't derail it too long. First is that light bowgun, it shouldn't be stronger than heavy bowgun, but it is. There's identity between the two bowguns is so blurred at this point, and heavy bowgun has little to no upsides outside of elemental pierce. Special ammo for both bowguns are essentially useless, as are most ammos, so half the kit, if not more, is just gone and tossed out the window. Light bowgun switch skills just shuffle numbers around, which is boring, and they only have one usable silk bind right now, which is counter mines, because you kind of have to have those iframes. Heavy bowgun, similar bow, the switch skills are all terrible and useless besides the shoulder check, and the only decent silk bind is setting sun. That only works specifically with elemental pierce ammo. It works with pierce, but you don't need it for that. It's just kind of lame to have this one thing function on one type of ammo. And overall, there's just no excitement, nothing new or unique for gunning. So yeah, I'm just kind of bored with them at this point. I can make a huge list about all the issues I have with gunning, which is basically melee now anyways, but nobody cares about gunning stuff, so I'll just leave it at that. Moving on to more combat stuff, Sunbreak in general was designed around all these counter moves that they gave every weapon. Monsters have absurd amount of tracking attacks and AoE attacks, and that are just pretty much impossible to dodge with our 4 iframes that we get, so we really have to rely on these counters. Repositioning is often useless, as monsters will travel infinite lengths to have their attacks land on you. There is no maximum attack length like older games where you can safely stand and avoid a hit. Ask any greatsword user, they know what I'm talking about. You have monsters that attack slow enough that you can effectively just counter all their moves with enough recovery time for your silk binds, and then you could just spam counters without worry or even having to dodge, making them complete pushovers. Then you have monsters that were designed with counters that do multi-hit attacks and attacks with secondary explosions specifically designed to counter player counters, which is fine on paper, but those are basically the only two types of fight there are. Monsters that aren't a threat because you just spam counters, and then the ones you have to try a little bit because you have to actually push roll after the counter or before. Most of the monster fights get boiled down to just that, and very few things actually feel challenging anymore. And no, getting one tap doesn't mean it's challenging, but that's where the game is at right now. You have these super bloated monsters with relatively simple movesets, but one mistake means you're dead. I mean, at least from a gunner's perspective. I personally like the idea of afflicted monsters. It kind of sort of was like an Apex thing, but then it got old really fast. Not just because of the HP bloat, but because they keep messing up with the pacing of the fights. While afflicted, they get like one move that's super fast just to trip up your muscle memory and your counter timing, which feels like a pretty cheap way to make difficulty. Then you have them on the normal state, which is fine. And then when you pop their afflicted state, they become exhausted, which should and technically is slower and easier to fight, but it's another change of attack speed. So you have to keep adjusting your counter timing, and then you end up getting hit by these super slow attacks which make you feel like shit just because we only have like a half a second counter window. And I just don't like the pacing of afflicted monsters. Regardless of what monsters they add in the title updates, it's going to boil down to one of those two fights. Either it's going to be a pushover, or it's going to be a little tough for a day or two until you learn how to roll properly, and then it's just going to be a cakewalk. I mean, unless it ends up just one-tapping you for no reason. Flaming Espinas, or whatever it is that's coming out, like, I couldn't be more lethargic about it. Espinas is already a terrible monster, and all you Frontier junkies are smoking crack if you think it's good. It's literally just a Rathian with the Bloodbath Diablos charge, and it's huge AF, so it's difficult to dodge in the jungle map, and that's it. That's the only reason why it has any sort of challenge. It's otherwise made out of paper. So Flaming Espinas is going to be that, and they're going to give it like one new combo it didn't have before, and then some big fire supernova special move that all monsters get now. Why does every monster need and get a supernova that it uses after a determined amount of time in its aura state? It's becoming a very common theme for all the new monsters, and I get it, it's supposed to be flashy, it is, but it's also boring after the 30th time. You either never see it because you just pop the aura states, or you actually pass the DPS checks and don't see it. Like since Iceborne, all the new monsters have been getting supernovas from TO, and I just don't care for it anymore. And then they have monsters like Silverlos that, will automatically do their special move once they go into aura state, and then they get status blocked so that you can't inflict statuses during it. Like, come on, like they're forcing you to see that stuff, and it's just like, I don't care anymore. So any new monster, especially a variant or a subspecies, which is pretty much gonna be everything we get in these title updates, it's gonna be like that. So like, what's there to be excited for? Sure, weapons and armor are the heart and soul of Monster Hunter, and we will get new stuff to play with the new monsters in the title update, right? Well, yeah, but that's my other problem with the Monster Hunter series right now. Armor and skills just feel so outdated, and I know that's never going to change. Literally every armor skill is just shuffling numbers around. Nothing changes how you actually play the game or how you approach a fight, at least not to any significant degree. And with how things are now, the only outcomes for armor and weapons are either it's weaker than what we currently have, so no one's going to use it, or it's got stronger skills or pieces so that it becomes a new meta and we get to have a few more points of damage on our set. That's it. It's not exciting. Vilcana's Frostcraft was the last skill that actually changed how you played a bit, but even that's a bit of a stretch. It was just good for crit draw, which was its actually own unique playstyle. It's just, even then, it wasn't that great. As far as weapons go, oh man, we're going to get a new fire sword, big whoop. And I also lost all hope for future Bogans because there are very strict rules that Capcom follows with Bogans. So I know we're not going to get anything with rapid fire level 3 ammos or clusters. Heavy Bogan already has solid clip sizes for all the level 3 ammo types, so there's nothing new that they could add to Heavy Bogans. And obviously we're not going to get any new ammo types. So I don't know, I'm just not excited for anything that they could possibly add to the game at this point. I'm also super salty with how poorly handled the mouse and keyboard support was, and I did make a few videos on that. There's so many little issues with menuing and keybinds and technical limitations because this is effectively a port on PC, and I just don't feel like dealing with it anymore because I know it's never going to get changed or fixed. They've had like a year, and it's like a lot of the same problems for base riders are still in Sunbreak. All the weird issues regarding like frame rate fluctuations, animation canceling bugs, input drops, and monster tracking are just getting a little too annoying, and I didn't really cover that so much on my speedrunning video, but it's such a huge nuisance. When you have to drop frames down to 30 because monsters track less or because you can actually do your greatsword swings faster, stuff like that just kind of takes all the steam out of it. Yeah, it's a lot of bitching, I know. Maybe I'm just over Monster Hunter, or it's just not for me, and I know a lot of people are thinking that. But I love Monster Hunter. The gameplay historically has been amazing, and even the thousands of hours of World were well spent. It's just Rise, really. Base Rise was just World with some Hunter arts from GU slapped on, and Sunbreak is that plus a few more things from GU and Frontier added, and it all feels just super shallow. I know it's kind of a spin-off filler game for the generation, but it really feels like it's just a hollow shell of a game. I'm sure Monster Hunter 6 will be great, and I'm all over it when it gets announced, for sure. I just didn't really like Rise, and while I did like Sunbreak a lot, I just don't see it keeping my attention anymore because there's just nothing that they could add that would alter gameplay in any significant fashion. And since there's no reason to do the endless carrot on a stick grind, because we all know that's never going to happen, I just can't bring myself to play it in any meaningful way. Sure, I'll still update Bogan sets and information for people, but it just doesn't bring me joy anymore. It's all the same stuff now. All the builds and setups are all the same. You're just shuffling a few numbers around. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to vent my current feelings with Sunbreak and Rise and why I don't play it as much anymore and why I don't speedrun except to test sets. And why I don't have much faith for the rest of the game. I put about 500, 600 hours into Sunbreak, which is cool and definitely worth the investment. I just can't play it as much as other Monster Hunter games. Just kind of waiting on Monster Hunter 6 at this point. So yeah, sorry for the rant, and thank you all for listening, and good luck out there, hunters.